Hello everybody and welcome to another album review. Today we are going to be taking a look at the album Firepower by Judas Priest. So first of all, much like my last update video that I did, I apologize for the background noise. It's still very warm in my dorm room. My roommate and I still have 4 fans going. So I apologize for that. There's not a whole lot I can do about it. There's really no way to cool this place off other than to have everything going. But hopefully you should still be able to hear me decently, I think at least. Today I'm going to be reviewing Firepower by Judas Priest. It's their newest album that came out earlier this year. And this review was also suggested by Zach D, who's a really cool guy. So shout out to him, thanks for requesting the video. I was probably going to listen to this album anyway and maybe review it anyway. But since he suggested it a couple of times, I figured I would listen to it now and review it now, just because why not? So for any of you who probably don't know, and most of you probably don't, I really, thus far, haven't gotten too much into classic metal bands like Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden, Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer. Bands like that I haven't really got into that much, but Judas Priest is probably, out of all of the kind of classic bands, they're the ones that I'm most familiar with. I've started getting into them a little bit, so they're pretty much the only classic metal band that I'm really into at all right now. I like songs by some of the other ones, but I just haven't really got too deep into them yet. And as usual, I'm gonna talk about things that I liked, things that I disliked, and overall thoughts on the album and all of that. So without further ado, let's begin. So the first good thing, which is probably no surprise to people who have seen my reviews before, is usually the first thing I like to point out. The sound and the production quality and everything in this album is pretty good. Enjoyable to listen to, it's pleasant to listen to. Even if an album necessarily doesn't have the best musicianship, it doesn't really interest me all that much. I don't really care much to listen to the actual songs. Which is not the case for this album, but even with albums that I would say are not very good, I can still appreciate the good sound quality and the production behind it. And as far as musicianship itself goes, it's pretty good in this album. Of course, Judas Priest has been around for many, many years. I think they've been around, if I remember correctly, since like the late 70s. So of course, they've got a lot of experience, and I also think that most of the members in the band now are members that have been in it for almost at least as long as the band itself has been around, which is pretty cool and definitely shows that they have some good experience behind them, because the musicianship throughout the album, in the drum playing, which I was quite impressed by actually. I thought the drums were really good, the guitar riffs, the solos, all of that stuff was really good. And of course, Rob Halford's vocals sound really great as well. Personally, his vocal style and the sound of his voice is not completely my thing. I still appreciate the talent behind it. It's not really my kind of style of what his voice sounds like, I guess, but it still sounds very good. And he's in like his late 60s now, I think, and he's still able to sing just as well, if not better, than he could back during Judas Priest's classic albums, which I can definitely appreciate and applaud him for that, as well as the other band members who are also clearly doing quite well. And this album, I would say, also doesn't really have any bad songs on it. It's consistently good beginning to end, which I think is definitely a great quality. There's a lot of songs on here that are, I think, really catchy, and I really enjoyed listening to, like Evil Never Dies, Rising from Ruins, Flamethrower, and Spectre, along with several others on the album as well. But yeah, there's a lot of really good catchy songs on here that I really enjoyed personally. Like I said, all the songs are pretty good, although of course there are some I like more than others and less than others. I can say that throughout this is a pretty good quality album, and I do enjoy listening to it. And I would also like to add, personally I didn't really listen a whole lot to the lyrics on this album, although I did listen to them a decent bit. And the lyrics themselves I thought were pretty good. I really enjoyed like the lyrics on Evil Never Dies again, Necromancer, Rising from Ruins, and some others as well, but those were probably standouts for me for lyrics at least. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff about this album, which I'm not very good at articulating what I think, especially with this, because I just listened to it a couple times just to get my thoughts on it. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in this album, which is certainly a very good thing. However, there are also a few things that I dislike about this album that, to me, are pretty big issues, honestly. The first thing, which is probably the biggest issue on this album, is that I felt like even though all of the songs were good, there wasn't a whole lot of variety. It was kind of samey. A lot of the songs for me kind of blended together. That's part of why it's hard for me to articulate my specific thoughts on the songs, because from what I remember of them, some of them just kind of blend together, and that's of course not really a bad thing, because again, the songs themselves are enjoyable to listen to, but there wasn't much variety. It was pretty much just like heavy metal, just whatever, and then there was one ballad at the end, I think. I don't necessarily think that not having variety is necessarily a bad thing, because there are a lot of albums that I enjoy where several of the songs are not necessarily sounding exactly the same, but the similar kind of style, which this album has as well. But those albums often have more variety than this one does, because this one is pretty much just varies between slower paced heavy metal and faster paced heavy metal, and then it has one ballad at the very end. Like I said, the songs aren't necessarily bad. I do enjoy listening to the album, but there isn't a whole lot of varieties, especially for as long as it is. This album is 14 tracks long, and it's about an hour in length. For that little variety, to me, it just didn't feel as interesting as I think it could have. It just kind of dragged on a little bit for me at times, and of course, not every album is going to be perfect, but I just think if they had cut out a couple of the worst songs, I think that would have definitely improved the quality of this album. Either that or included more variety, replaced like a couple of the heavier songs with some softer songs or something a little bit more different. Another thing that is also a big issue, not necessarily as big of an issue as the variety and everything, but to me there's not really any songs on this album other than maybe one, but even then that's a little iffy. There's no songs really on this album that I would consider absolutely fantastic, great songs. And I understand that, there are several people that are fans of this band that would probably argue very much the opposite, but for me, it just didn't really do it. What's here is very good, and that is definitely a positive, but to me, if an album is going to be a really great album, there has to be several songs that I will just come back to constantly that I think are just really fantastic songs. And while this album has some songs that are very good, there's not much here that I can necessarily see myself coming back to over and over again, or listening to it and being like, that was a fantastic song. It was like 10 out of 10, like best song ever, or anything like that. This just doesn't have that for me, and maybe that's because my musical taste is a little different from maybe like a typical fan of this band who listens to more of the classic stuff, and me personally, I don't listen to a whole lot of it. I listen to more like the modern stuff, along with like, melodic death metal and black metal and stuff like that. That's more my kind of style, and this is not as much, but that might just be kind of an issue of my own personal taste. I can definitely understand someone who enjoys the classic bands and the style of Judas Priest a lot more than I do, enjoying this album a lot more than I do. And the final negative thing I have here is that, in my opinion, this album starts and ends somewhat weak. To me, the first couple of songs on this album and the last song, which are Firepower, the title track, and Lightning Strike, as well as Sea of Red, are, in my opinion, three of the weakest songs on this album. The second to last song, Lone Wolf, is actually pretty decent, and I do like that song, but those three are just, they don't really do it for me, and I can definitely appreciate it. I think Firepower and Lightning Strike, again, as well as Sea of Red, are still good songs, but I think they are probably some of the weaker ones At least to me, that's kind of how I felt about it when I listened to this album. They just didn't really do it for me. I feel like they could have started the album a little better and ended the album a little better, because a lot of my favorite songs in this album are from kind of the middle of the album. That's just kind of my own kind of thoughts on that. Of course, a lot of people probably think that Firepower is a really good song, Lightning Strike is a really good song, and Sea of Red is a really good song, and like I said, I can appreciate the positive elements of those songs, but for me, they just didn't quite work. I feel like, for example, the title track, Firepower, if that was placed more in the middle of the album and a better song was put at the very beginning, I feel like I would enjoy that singular song more, but as a beginning to the album, to me, it just doesn't quite work. But all of that being said, all of that negativity out of the way, this is still a very good album, and I do recommend that you listen to it. And it was kind of interesting for me because, like I said, I don't listen to the kind of classic style of heavy metal with like Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, etc. very often, so I might have to do that a little bit more and give you guys my thoughts on that. But overall, it's a pretty solid album beginning to end, even though personally I don't think there's anything absolutely mind-blowingly fantastic on this album. I do still think it's quite good, and I can probably see myself listening to it on occasion, but like I said, there's nothing on here that I feel like I will constantly come back to. As far as my favorite songs, my three favorites are probably Evil Never Dies, Necromancer, and Rising from Ruins, with a special shout out to Children of the Sun as well, because that one, if I was doing like 4 songs, that would be there, but I usually only do 3. Yeah, those songs are probably my favorites. But overall, that's pretty much everything I had to say in this review. Let me know what you guys think of the album. Do you disagree with me or do you agree with me? I know for a fact that Zach D, the one who requested this video, is going to disagree because he has said on multiple occasions that so far this is his favorite album of the year. But let me know what you guys think anyway, and if you have any suggestions for reviews or videos or anything like that that I could do in the future, whether it be, you know, any other albums that have come out this year or even more classic style albums, maybe like something from like Iron Maiden or Metallica or whatever, or any of those classic bands, just so I can kind of get into them a little more, because I do want to, but I just don't know really where to start, I guess. But let me know in the comments below, and that is pretty much it for this video, so I will see you all next time.